I knew something was off the moment I turned onto Pine Orchard Lane and saw a cloud of dust rising over the trees. That wasn't fog. That was drywall. And the closer I got to the back of my lot, the sicker I felt. My name's Silas Archer. I'm a 35-year-old paramedic who bought a quiet fixer-upper cottage on the edge of Evergrove Estates, a neighborhood that looks charming on the outside, but hides a nest of power-hungry HOA snakes beneath the white picket fences. I kept to myself, paid my dues, didn't cause trouble. Well, apparently, that wasn't enough for Nancy Belleford. Nancy is the kind of woman who looks like she was born holding a clipboard. Mid-50s, frosted bob, pastel cardigans, and a voice that could curdle milk. She's the president of the Evergrove HOA and treats the neighborhood like her own personal fiefdom. She once fined my neighbor $200 for excessively vibrant Halloween decor. And now she's standing on my lawn, arms crossed, watching a bulldozer flatten the only thing I owned outright. My cottage. My little weekend escape.
Gone.
What the hell is going on? I shouted, slamming the door of my truck and sprinting toward the wreckage. The operator of the bulldozer cut the engine. A few construction guys looked at me like I was about to explode. They were right. "You're trespassing," Nancy said, already waving some paperwork at me like it was a holy relic. "This demolition is fully authorized by the HOA. That's my house," I yelled. "You bulldozed my house." She didn't blink. "Mr. Archer, the HOA has sent you 7 overdue notices for unpaid maintenance fees totaling $1,325. You failed to respond, and per Section 9B of the Evergrove Covenant, that constitutes abandonment of property." "Abandonment?" I barked. "I was at work for 48 hours straight. I'm a paramedic, Nancy, not a fugitive." She gave a thin smile. "You've been warned multiple times. We even posted notices." I tore the envelope from her hand. Every single letter was dated within the past week. All marked urgent. All with a different typo in my name. One had my last name as Arson. Another one was addressed to Silas Archer. "No judge would ever consider these valid," I growled. "Well, lucky for you," she said. "We didn't need a judge. The HOA board voted unanimously. You missed the meeting." "I didn't even know there was a meeting," I yelled. "I never got any notice." "You should check your mailbox more often," she said, turning like she was about to walk away. The board acts swiftly to protect property values. And frankly, that little shack was a blight. I stared at the pile of crushed beams and splintered memories where I used to barbecue on weekends and read on the porch. My gut turned. "You just committed felony destruction of property," I said slowly. "You think the HOA can override state law?" Nancy didn't even hesitate. "The Evergrove Covenant is legally binding. You signed it when you bought here. Perhaps next time, you'll read the fine print." I did read it. And I knew the HOA had power, but I also knew what they couldn't do. I clenched my fists, breathing hard. As a paramedic, I've seen people at their worst. But something about the smug face of a power-drunk HOA president made me see red in a whole new way. "You just made a mistake," I said low. Nancy tilted her head. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Archer?" "No," I said. "But you should know something." She waited. "My dad's name is Justice Marshall Archer." She blinked. "You know, Supreme Court of Georgia? The guy who rewrote the state's HOA enforcement statutes last year." Her face paled just a touch. "And he hates HOAs." I turned and walked back to my truck before I said something that would land me in jail. The construction workers were frozen in place. One of them gave me a look like he wanted to apologize but didn't have the guts. I drove straight to my parents' place. My dad was retired now, but he still had a home office that looked more like a war room. He opened the door before I could knock. "Silas," he said, stepping aside. "You look like someone set your truck on fire." "They bulldozed it," I said. He blinked. "Your truck." "My cottage." He paused. "The HOA?"
"Yeah."
He let out a slow breath.
"Come in."
"We're going to make them wish they'd never heard of Evergrove." By the end of the day, we'd pulled up the HOA's charter, property records, the Georgia Homeowners Association Accountability Act, and most importantly, their meeting minutes. A few calls to some legal contacts confirmed what I suspected. They had skipped due process, fabricated notices, and violated at least 3 state statutes in the demolition. My dad looked up from a printout, eyebrows raised. They voted to demolish based on a misprinted name? This isn't just civil. This is criminal. I nodded. Nancy thinks she's untouchable. He smiled coldly. Let's touch her then. Over the next 48 hours, we compiled everything. I went back to Evergrove the next morning, this time not alone. I brought my friend Dante, a locksmith-turned-private investigator who owed me a favor. We walked the neighborhood, talked to residents, gathered statements. Turned out, Nancy had a history. She'd fined a widow for leaving her porch light on too long, threatened to foreclose on a man's home over a missing hedge, and once, she'd towed a veteran's truck for aesthetic disruption. That same veteran, Hal, showed us his towing bill $2,000 for a truck that never left his driveway. Everyone was scared of Nancy, but not anymore. That weekend, I sent certified letters to every homeowner in Evergrove Estates. Inside each envelope was a copy of the complaint I'd filed with the county attorney, a list of HOA infractions, and a QR code linking to a site where they could join a class action lawsuit. The next morning, Nancy showed up at my parents' house. "How dare you drag my name through the mud?" she screeched the moment I opened the door. She was flanked by 2 HOA board members, Terry and Linda, who looked like they regretted coming along. "You bulldozed my house," I said. "You dragged yourself. You're making a mockery of this community." "No," my dad said, stepping into view. "You did that the moment you decided you were above the law." Nancy's mouth opened, then closed. She recognized him. "Justice Archer," she said stiffly. He nodded. "You'll be receiving a cease and desist order, followed by a formal investigation into your board's conduct. You've violated your mandate in at least 11 documented ways." "You have no jurisdiction," she snapped. "I wrote the jurisdiction," he said. Nancy looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. I watched her carefully. Her eyes weren't just panicked, they were calculating. She wasn't going to back down quietly. That's when I realized this was just the beginning. Nancy didn't knock. She marched right into my dad's foyer, like the place owed her something. Her shoes left faint scuffs on the polished floor, and she clutched a worn leather binder like it was a shield. Terry and Linda trailed behind her, both visibly less enthusiastic than they'd been when they first arrived. Their eyes kept darting to the hallway, probably hoping an exit would appear. "I'm here to resolve this before it gets ugly," Nancy said, setting the binder down on a side table with a thud. My dad didn't move from his spot by the staircase. "It's already well past that. You demolished a standing residence without due process. That's not just civil overreach, it's criminal mischief and unlawful destruction of property." Nancy opened the binder. "We acted under the authority granted by the Evergrove Covenant. Section 9 specifically allows for decisive action when a property is deemed." "You're quoting a document that was amended illegally 2 years ago," my dad interrupted. "I already pulled the filings." "You never registered the amendment with the county. That makes it unenforceable." Terry cleared his throat. "We assumed the filing had gone through. That was handled by the previous secretary." Linda gave him a sideways glare. "You were the secretary." Terry looked down and pretended to examine his shoes. Nancy's jaw tensed. "This doesn't have to escalate. If your son withdraws his complaint, we're willing to offer a settlement. A replacement shed, perhaps. Set on a new concrete pad. Fresh paint. We'll even waive his dues for the rest of the year." I took a step forward. "You think my home can be replaced with a shed and a coat of paint?" "It was a cottage," she said, like that made it better. "No," I said. "It was mine, and you leveled it." She narrowed her eyes. "You're overreacting." My dad reached for a folder on the entryway table and handed it to her. "That's a copy of the official criminal complaint we filed with the county sheriff. Destruction of private property, fraud, and unlawful eviction." We've also submitted a request for a temporary injunction to freeze the HOA's accounts. The judge will see it Monday." Nancy flipped through the pages, her face tightening with every line. "You're bluffing," she said finally. "No," my dad replied. "You're used to people being too intimidated or uninformed to fight back." Nancy's confidence faltered for the first time. She closed the folder carefully, as though trying not to reveal anything. "You'll regret this," she said, voice low. "You already do," I replied. She turned on her heel, Terry and Linda scurrying after her. As the door shut behind them, my dad turned to me. "She's going to try something desperate next." "I know," I said. "So I'm going back in." The next morning, I showed up at Evergrove Estates wearing a collared shirt, carrying a clipboard, and parking farther down the street than usual. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to listen. I started with Hal, the veteran whose truck had been towed. He greeted me with a raised eyebrow and a cautious handshake. "They ever pay you back for that tow?" I asked. "They gave me a $50 gift card to Home Depot and told me to stop bringing it up," he said. I nodded. "I'm building a case. I need your statement." He didn't hesitate. "Tell me where to sign." From there, I went door to door. A nurse who'd been fined for planting native wildflowers. A retired teacher who was threatened with lien over a misplaced recycling bin. A couple who'd tried to install solar panels and had been denied 3 times without explanation. Each story added another brick to the wall we were building. By the time the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I had over 30 signed affidavits. People were tired of pretending Nancy wasn't a problem. They just hadn't known how to fight her. At home, I scanned every statement, labeled them, and backed them up 3 ways. My dad had already arranged a meeting with a district attorney's office contact for later that week. But even with mounting evidence, I knew Nancy wouldn't wait for the legal gears to start turning. She'd act before then, and she'd act recklessly. I just didn't expect it to be that night. At 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was Dante, my PI friend, who had quietly installed a few cameras on the lot where my cottage used to be. "She's back," he said over the line. "Not alone this time." I was out of bed and in my truck within 5 minutes. When I pulled up to the lot, I saw the glow of flashlights moving through the debris. Nancy stood near what was left of the old chimney stack, speaking to a man in a brown vest and hard hat. Another man stood nearby, holding a clipboard and flashlight. I stayed low behind a neighbor's hedge and listened. "We say it was an unpermitted structure," Nancy whispered. "That it was unsafe. Get it cleaned up before the inspection next week. If it looks like raw land, we can reclassify the parcel." The man with the vest hesitated. "That's not what we agreed to. I'm not falsifying records." "You already signed the contract," she hissed. "You want your payment or not?" That was enough. I stepped out from behind the hedge and clicked on my own flashlight. "Hope you're not camera shy, Nancy." She spun around, flashlight wobbling. The man in the vest cursed and stepped back. "Silas," she snapped, "you can't be here. This is HOA property." "No, it's mine." "And you're trespassing." "You're harassing us," she said quickly. "I'll report this." "You're orchestrating a cover-up and bribing contractors to falsify safety reports." The man with the clipboard turned and bolted down the street. I pointed at the chimney. "That's not going anywhere. It's the last structural element of the original build. Demolishing it before the investigation is tampering with evidence." Nancy's face twisted. "You're making this into something it's not." My dad's voice came from behind me. "The county sheriff will decide what it is." A patrol car pulled up, its lights off. 2 deputies stepped out, one of them holding a warrant. Nancy's face drained of color. "We received a tip about attempted tampering with an active investigation site," the deputy said. "We're going to need to ask you a few questions, ma'am." Nancy tried to protest, but the deputy was already leading her to the car. The contractor looked at me. "I didn't know it was like this. I thought it was routine cleanup." "Tell that to the sheriff," I said. "And bring your contract. You might be able to help your case." As the patrol car pulled away with Nancy in the back seat, I turned to my dad. "That was fast." "I called in a favor," he said. They've been circling this HOA for a while. Your case was the final crack in the dam. The next week was a whirlwind. The county opened a formal investigation into Evergrove's HOA board. Nancy was suspended from her duties pending the outcome and banned from managing any HOA funds. Terry resigned 2 days later. Linda tried to rewrite history, but emails recovered from a deleted inbox showed she'd been aware of the illegal amendment the entire time. The residents of Evergrove held an emergency vote. They dissolved the standing board and appointed a temporary oversight committee. I wasn't interested in joining, but I did show up to every meeting, clipboard in hand, making sure no one ever got away with what Nancy did again. The last time I saw her, she was exiting the county courthouse with a lawyer who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. She didn't make eye contact. She didn't have to. The ruins of my cottage were cleared properly, with permits and documentation, under the supervision of the new committee. I've started rebuilding this time with reinforced walls, solar panels, and a porch twice as wide. I took a hammer to the first nail myself. Not out of anger, but to remind myself what can be rebuilt when you refuse to be bullied. And this time, I'm keeping the security cameras. The new oversight committee made progress quickly, but cleaning up after Nancy's reign was like untangling barbed wire. The HOA's financial records were a mess, half of them handwritten, the other half stored on a decade-old laptop that hadn't been backed up since the Bush administration. Still, with the sheriff's investigation intensifying and a small army of fed-up residents ready to testify, the whole operation began to unravel. But what we found next blew the top off the whole case. It started with a name Victor Kellerman, a property appraiser who'd filed at least 6 reports on homes in Evergrove over the past 2 years. Most of them had resulted in sudden safety violations, or downgrades that just happened to justify steep fines. Hal, the veteran, remembered the name from when his truck was towed. The inspection that led to his citation had been signed by Kellerman. The problem? Victor Kellerman had died 3 years ago. I found that out by sheer accident. I was helping Dante organize digital copies of inspection reports when I noticed Kellerman's signature on a document dated just 4 months earlier. Curious, I looked him up online. His obituary was the first result. I called my dad immediately. He didn't even hesitate. That's document forgery. Multiple counts if they used Kellerman's name more than once. I'll contact the district attorney. By the end of the day, we'd sent over 12 inspection reports with Kellerman's signature signed long after his death. All of them linked to fines, forced maintenance, or threats of foreclosure. The real twist? The same notary stamp appeared on half of them, belonging to none other than Linda from the old board. That night, I met with 2 members of the new committee, Elijah and Sasha. They were both relatively new to Evergrove and had no ties to the previous board. Elijah was a former zoning compliance officer, and Sasha worked in municipal records. They were sharp, honest, and more than a little disturbed by what we were uncovering. I reviewed the HOA's filing history, Sasha said, flipping through a manila folder. There are over 20 notifications of inaccessible homes that were supposedly inspected by Kellerman. But no homeowner ever received notice of an upcoming inspection, which is required by law. Elijah nodded. And based on the fines issued after those inspections, the HOA collected nearly $60,000 in the last 18 months alone, most of it from elderly or single residents. I stared at the list of names. It was the same pattern over and over. Isolated homeowners, vague inspection reports, sudden fines, and threats of legal action if they didn't pay up. They were running a racket, I said, targeting people who wouldn't push back. Elijah leaned forward. And if they didn't pay, the board quietly filed liens. A few of those properties went up for auction. Guess who submitted bids? He handed me another sheet. Nancy Belleford. I read aloud. And Belleford Property Holdings, LLC? Sasha's expression hardened. She's been flipping homes stolen from her own neighbors. I felt a cold knot clench in my chest. Demolishing my cottage wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was part of a larger scam. And if we hadn't caught it when we did, she could have done it again. The next morning, the sheriff's department raided the HOA's old office, an unassuming cinderblock building behind the community clubhouse. They walked out with boxes of records, hard drives, and a desktop computer that looked like it belonged in a museum. Nancy had kept meticulous records, but she never imagined anyone else would see them. Linda was arrested first. She'd notarized at least 9 falsified documents, and her signature was on multiple lien filings submitted under Kellerman's name. Terry turned himself in the next day, probably hoping for leniency. He claimed he just signed what Nancy put in front of him. It didn't matter. The DA charged him anyway. Nancy herself was harder to pin down. Her lawyer argued that she'd relied on the board's internal systems and couldn't be expected to verify every document personally. But the DA had something better: an email chain between Nancy and a man named Curtis Frey, a former board member who'd left Evergrove after a sudden payout. In one email, Nancy wrote, "Use Kellerman's template. It gets the job done. Make sure the notary seal matches the others." That was enough. The district attorney filed charges against her for conspiracy to commit fraud, document forgery, unlawful demolition, and racketeering under state law. Racketeering. That elevated this from HOA mismanagement to organized crime. The fallout was immediate. Local news stations picked up the story, broadcasting Nancy's mugshot next to headlines like "HOA President Charged in Demolition Scam" and "Scheme Targeted Elderly, Disabled Homeowners." Reporters camped outside Evergrove's gates for days, and residents who used to keep their heads down started speaking up. I got a call from Hal later that week. "Just wanted to say thank you," he told me. "We wouldn't have had the guts to stand up if you hadn't started this." "I didn't do it alone," I said. He laughed. "Yeah, but you lit the match." In the weeks that followed, the new committee began working with the county to restructure Evergrove's charter. They partnered with a nonprofit that specialized in HOA reform and brought in an independent auditor to untangle the finances. Residents voted on new bylaws that stripped the HOA president of unilateral enforcement power and required a 2/3 majority for any lien or fine over $500. But the biggest change? Transparency. All meetings were now recorded and posted online. Notices had to be sent a full 10 days in advance, with proof of delivery. And any inspection required written consent from the homeowner. People weren't scared anymore. They were angry and determined. As for me, I kept rebuilding. The frame of my new cottage went up fast. I chose cedar this time, stronger, longer lasting. My dad helped with permits, and Dante installed a full perimeter camera system. We even added a 2-way intercom at the gate just in case. One afternoon, while I was bolting down new floorboards, Sasha stopped by. "Got something for you," she said, handing me a small envelope. Inside was a check from Evergrove's restitution fund. The amount covered the full appraised value of the cottage, plus damages. But what mattered more was the note included with it. "On behalf of a better neighborhood." It read, "We're sorry it took this long." I set the check aside and walked into the unfinished frame of what would soon be my living room. The sun filtered through the beams, casting long shadows on the concrete slab. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Nancy's trial began 2 months later. I was called to testify along with over 24 residents. The courtroom was packed every day. Her defense team tried to paint her as a misunderstood civic leader, but the evidence didn't lie, and neither did the signatures of a dead man. She was found guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month, but the judge made one thing clear: she would not be seeing the inside of another HOA office for the rest of her life. The day after the verdict, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered it on the 3rd ring. "Mr. Archer? This is Deputy Marshal Langston. Just wanted to let you know Nancy Belleford's bail was revoked. She attempted to access one of her shell companies to move funds. She's in county lockup until sentencing." I didn't say much, just thanked him and hung up. Some victories don't need celebration. They just need closure. The new Evergrove is still a work in progress, but it's quieter, fairer, human. The people who live here finally have a voice, and they're using it. And me? I sit on my rebuilt porch most evenings, watching the sun dip behind the trees, hammer resting beside me, the scent of sawdust still lingering in the air. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just the sound of hammers and the silence of peace. The day the sentencing came down, the courthouse was standing room only. I sat near the back, out of the spotlight, next to Elijah and Sasha. The air buzzed with a kind of eager anticipation that didn't belong in a courtroom, but when a community's been trampled for years under the heel of people who thought they'd never be held accountable, justice starts to feel like oxygen. Nancy Belleford entered in a slate-gray suit that swallowed her frame, her hair less polished than it used to be, her shoulders not quite as square. She didn't look at the gallery. She kept her eyes forward, jaw tight, hands folded like she was trying to keep them from shaking. Her attorney whispered something into her ear. She didn't respond. Judge Callahan took the bench, his expression unreadable. He was known for two things: zero tolerance for manipulation and a memory like steel cable. He presided over the trial with the kind of precision you'd expect from a surgeon, not a single wasted word, no theatrics tolerated. And now he held the final say. This court has reviewed the pre-sentencing reports, victim impact statements, and financial records submitted by the prosecution. He began, his voice low but clear. The findings reveal a pattern of deliberate misconduct, coordinated deception, and calculated financial exploitation of vulnerable residents. He turned his gaze toward Nancy. She didn't flinch, but the tension in her neck gave her away. You used your position to target, harass, and ultimately defraud dozens of homeowners who trusted you to protect their interests. Instead, you orchestrated a scheme that weaponized the very structure designed to serve them. You impersonated professionals, falsified legal documents, and leveraged fear as a tool to acquire property through coercion. He paused for breath. Under Georgia law, the charges of racketeering, fraud, and criminal mischief carry significant sentences. Due to the scale of your offenses and the sustained nature of your scheme, the court finds no justification for leniency. The room seemed to hold its breath. I hereby sentence you to 22 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole no sooner than 15 years. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to all known victims, as determined by the court-appointed auditor. Any remaining assets held under Belleford Property Holdings or its subsidiaries will be liquidated and distributed through a victim compensation fund. There was no applause, just a quiet, collective exhale. Nancy was led away in handcuffs, her expression unreadable. She didn't look back. Maybe she finally understood what it felt like to be powerless. Outside the courthouse, local media swarmed. Sasha and Elijah were pulled aside for brief interviews, but I kept walking. I wasn't interested in headlines. I'd gotten what I came for: peace. But it didn't end there. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I got a call from Sasha. City Records office flagged something, she said. A permit request from last year. You might want to see it. I met her and Elijah at the Evergrove Community Center. They'd converted the old HOA office into a public meeting space. The walls had been painted over, the filing cabinets replaced with open shelves, and a large whiteboard now displayed upcoming events, birthdays, and neighborhood watch updates. Sasha handed me a copy of the permit. It was dated 7 months before the demolition of my cottage, filed under a name I didn't recognize: Kenneth Loring. What am I looking at? I asked. Loring doesn't exist, Elijah said. We ran a background check. No tax records, no license, not even an address. But this permit was submitted for site preparation and debris clearing at your lot. I stared at the paper. The signature was neat, the notary stamp familiar. Linda. Sasha nodded. We think Nancy had this submitted early. It was part of the plan. She'd already decided to take your land months before any unpaid fees were ever mentioned. I felt something cold settle in my chest. It was one thing to act out of spite, but this was premeditated theft. Why me? I asked quietly. Elijah opened a folder and handed me a property map. Strategic location. Your lot is the only one that backs directly onto the undeveloped greenbelt. They wanted to subdivide and build 2 luxury homes. But your cottage was in the way. I held the map for a long moment. The greed in it was obvious. Red lines, penciled lot numbers, a proposed access road. All of it built on top of what used to be my porch. They never saw people, I said. Just square footage. Sasha leaned on the table. We're petitioning the county to have that land protected. No development for 20 years. It'll stay green space. I looked at her, surprised. That's a bold move. Not really, she said. It's what the neighborhood voted for last week. That was the final nail, not in a coffin, but in a foundation. Evergrove was rebuilding itself the right way this time. A month later, we held a community barbecue in the Greenbelt. Tables were set up under the trees, kids played soccer between the hedges, and someone brought an old stereo that played nothing but 70s hits. Hal manned the grill, flipping burgers with a military-level precision. Sasha had baked 3 pies. Elijah brought a cooler the size of a bathtub. I stood near the edge of the clearing, sipping lemonade, watching as neighbors who used to avoid eye contact now laughed together, traded stories, and shared tools. Dante showed up halfway through, tossed his keys into the grass, and walked over. Place looks different, he said. Feels different too. He nodded. Heard you've got a front porch again. Wider than the last one. He grinned. Good. You'll need it when they elect you to the new HOA board. I nearly dropped my cup. Absolutely not. Too late. Your name's already on the ballot. I gave him a look. You serious? He shrugged. You're the only one they trust not to sell the neighborhood to a hedge fund. I groaned. I just wanted a quiet life. He clapped me on the shoulder. That's exactly why they want you. I didn't argue further. Not because I agreed, but because Sasha was waving me over to taste one of her pies and I'd learned better than to keep her waiting. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the kids started chasing fireflies, I walked the short trail that led back to my rebuilt cottage. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have granite countertops or a theater room, but it was mine. The porch light clicked on as I approached, triggered by motion. I stepped onto the wood planks and sat down in the old rocking chair I'd salvaged from the debris months ago. It still creaked, but the sound was comforting now. A soft breeze rustled the trees. Somewhere in the distance, someone lit a sparkler. Its hiss faded into the crickets. No more threats. No more fake fines. No more clipboard tyrants with delusions of grandeur. Just peace. And if anyone ever thought about trying something again, well, the cameras were still there. The law was still watching. And this time, the community would rise as one. Because we'd already proven what happened when the wrong person gets too much power. And we'd made sure it would never happen again.